everyone, I'm Julie Cefalu, and your tip today has to do with making your piecing a little bit more easier and effective using thread savers. Let me show you how I've got my machine set up and how I use the thread savers. So this is what a thread saver looks like, and they've also been called leaders and enders, starter scraps, anything like that, but basically it's a folded piece of fabric. Often I will use like the extra binding strips that I have. I'll just cut them into little usable segments, and here's one that I've used over and over again, so I really do use these all the time. Basically I start my sewing with one of these underneath my presser foot. So I'm going to put one right now underneath my foot like that, and I start sewing onto this piece, and I'm going to sew on this, and I'm going to sew right off of it, and now I'm going to take my piecing squares and sew onto these. So what this thread saver does is it tells me that my machine is threaded correctly, the tension's good, everything's working before, so any mistakes happen here and not on my piece. And it also prevents that thread nest from happening underneath my fabric. And if you're working with triangles or corners, it helps to prevent that corner from getting sucked down into the throat space of your machine. So I can chain piece a whole bunch of times, and then I end on one of these also. So I'm going to stitch off of this piece and right on to my next thread saver. And then I'll clip my threads, and now I'm ready to go for the next time I do my piecing. The other thing that I'll use instead of a thread saver, or in place of a thread saver, are some 2.5 inch squares. So right here I've got a container that I got at the dollar store, and I have some 2.5 inch squares that I've cut from a leftover project. So anytime I finish a project and I've got some leftover scraps, I can cut them into 2.5 inch squares and they're ready to go. So I've separated them into light and dark, and I can just pick up 2 of these, and these will now become my starter scraps. So I will use this down here to get this a little bit less confusing. I'm going to get this one out of the way. So this is actually my starter scrap. So I'm going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance, and at the same time I'm piecing together my scraps to make a scrap quilt. So once I've done that, I can stitch onto my next piecing project, whatever that may be, and then I'd end on another set of these 2.5 inch squares. Eventually I'll have a bunch of pairs of squares sewn together. How's that for a rhyme? Let's get this on there. And I'm on my way. I can sew my pairs together, and so this is just a nice, fast, efficient way of using up your scraps and getting a thread saver going, and I really recommend you trying it. It's a habit that I've developed, and I can't start sewing without one of these, so give it a try.